It only took one look for everything to change. As I stepped into the courtroom, the weight of the world seemed to stop. I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to walk in late like this, and I certainly wasn't supposed to see the way everyone froze when they realized who I was. But they had no idea what was coming. None of them knew who I really was. And that moment, that single moment when the judge's eyes locked onto mine, everything changed. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. My name is Vera Langston. You probably wouldn't recognize me if you saw me out in the world. I'm an old woman, 68 years old, and I've lived a quiet life. Most of it spent as a librarian in a sleepy town, tucked away in a corner where no one really looked twice. I never cared much for attention. People knew me as sweet, harmless, maybe even a little quiet. No one ever expected me to be anything other than the little old lady that walked to church on Sundays, or the one who baked cookies for the neighbours. My life was simple, uneventful. But today was different. I walked into that courtroom like any other. At the back of the room, the eyes of every lawyer and juror falling on me as I shuffled past. The room was tense, thick with anticipation. They were in the middle of a trial. The judge, a sharp man in his late 50s, was doing his best to look professional, like he had everything under control. The lawyers exchanged words, and Frank, my ex-husband, sat up front, smug and confident. His lawyer was whispering something in his ear, a quiet conversation that was supposed to be about me. Then, just as I was about to take my seat in the back, everything stopped. The judge's head snapped up, his eyes widening. He froze. His voice, barely above a whisper, reached my ears. "Is that her?" The courtroom went dead silent. Every single person was staring at me now. I felt my heart race, my palms starting to sweat. No one had ever looked at me like this before. No one had ever seen me the way I was about to be seen now. Frank's smug expression faltered. The atmosphere in the room shifted. But I stayed quiet. I didn't move, didn't respond. I just let the moment linger. You see, Frank didn't know what I knew. He didn't know the secret I'd been carrying with me for years. He had no idea what I was capable of. And when the judge asked that question, when he looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and confusion, things were about to change for good. The room was tense. Everyone was waiting. And then, the judge's voice broke the silence again. "Is that her?" he asked. I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. The tables were turning, and now no one would ever look at me the same way again. At first, I thought maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe the courtroom wasn't really that tense. But then, the judge spoke again. This wasn't just a question about who I was. It was a realization, a shift in the air that no one could ignore. The room wasn't just shocked. It was on edge. Frank's eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time in years, I saw fear flicker in them. But it wasn't the kind of fear you might think. It wasn't a panic over the trial, or the case he thought he was about to win. No, this was a much deeper kind of fear. The fear of being exposed, of losing control. The moment I walked in, I saw it in his eyes. He didn't know what I was about to do, but he knew it couldn't be good. Frank had always underestimated me, and for years I let him. I let him think that I was just some quiet, harmless old woman who couldn't possibly pose a threat. And for a long time, I played the part. I let him think that the years of humiliation and dismissal didn't matter. I was the weak one. I was the one who had nothing to offer. But today, that all changed. As I took my seat, I could feel the weight of the room on me. The lawyers were still scribbling down notes, but they were paying attention to me now. The judge cleared his throat, trying to compose himself, but I could tell he was just as bewildered as the rest of them. He looked down at his papers, then up at me again, as if trying to make sense of it all. I didn't give him the satisfaction of answering immediately. I wanted him to sit with the question, to realize that he had no idea who I was, not truly. Frank's lawyer, a smooth-talking man named Gregory, sneered from across the room. He leaned in and whispered something to Frank, probably trying to make him feel better. But Frank was losing his cool. The smirk on his face slowly disappeared, replaced by a deep furrow in his brow. I could almost hear him thinking, this wasn't supposed to happen. Frank and I had been married for 20 years, and in that time I learned a lot about him. He always thought he was the one calling the shots, the one pulling the strings. But I'd been quietly watching, learning, waiting. Every insult, every dismissal, every time he belittled me, it all built up over the years. And now, here we were, in the courtroom of all places, and I wasn't the helpless woman he thought I was. I was about to remind him who was really in control. The judge finally cleared his throat again and glanced between Frank and me, his confusion obvious. "We'll recess for a few moments," he said, his voice shaky. "I think we need to clarify something before we proceed." And just like that, the tension in the room thickened. As the judge left the room, I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting, wondering. But they didn't know. None of them knew what was about to happen. Not yet. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of everyone's gaze. I wasn't going to let this moment slip by. And when the judge returned, he wouldn't just see a quiet librarian. He'd see someone who had been silently waiting for this moment, for the right time to strike. The room was still. The silence hung heavily as everyone waited. What were they all thinking? What was Frank thinking? I could see the sweat starting to bead on his forehead. He wasn't as confident as he had been before. I'd walked in late, yes, but it was clear now that my presence had shifted the entire courtroom. The question wasn't about my timing anymore. It was about who I really was, and that scared him. As the judge called for a brief recess, I could hear the muttered conversations, the whispers flying between Frank and his lawyer, Gregory. I didn't care what they were saying. I knew it was coming. Frank had always thought he could walk all over me. He'd dismissed me for years, thought he could just take everything I had with a smile and a handshake. But what he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I wasn't just some old woman. I was the one who held the key to everything. I looked at the judge as he left the room, his face still frozen in confusion. The courtroom buzzed with tension, the lawyers exchanging nervous glances. No one had expected me to show up like this, and I had no intention of letting them leave this room without knowing exactly who I was and why I was there. I took a deep breath and stood up, my legs steady despite the pounding of my heart. Every step I took towards the front of the room seemed to echo louder than the last. Frank's eyes locked onto mine, a flash of panic crossing his face. He wasn't prepared for this. He thought he could outsmart me, charm me into silence, or at least scare me into staying out of his way. But today, I was done being scared. As I reached the front, I could see the confusion on the judge's face. He was trying to process what was happening. Who was this woman who had suddenly turned his courtroom upside down? "I think I need to hear from her," the judge said, his voice a bit more confident now, but still unsure. That was my cue. I'd made them wait long enough. "I'm Vera Langston," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "And Frank, you might want to listen closely, because everything you thought you knew about this case just changed." The room was dead silent. Frank looked like he'd just been slapped. His mouth opened, but no words came out. I could see the pieces clicking into place for him. The truth was beginning to dawn on him. But it wasn't enough yet. Not for me. I pulled out a folder from my bag, the one I'd been carrying with me for weeks, making sure to gather everything I needed. As I placed it on the table in front of me, I saw Frank's lawyer exchange a nervous glance. That was when I knew the tide was turning for good. No more pretending, no more playing nice. "Frank," I said, locking eyes with him, "you thought you were the one in control, but you've been playing a game you didn't even know you were losing." I opened the folder and slid the first document across the table. "Let's see how you handle this." The moment I spoke those words, I knew Frank's world was about to crumble. And for the first time in years, I felt a sense of power I'd never allowed myself to feel before. The judge motioned for silence as I handed over the documents. He stared at them, confused, then looked back at me. "Is this legitimate?" he asked. I didn't answer. I let the documents speak for themselves. What was coming next would be more than anyone in that room was prepared for. The judge looked from the papers to me, then back to Frank. The weight of the moment hung in the air like a storm about to break. The silence was deafening. Frank's face was pale now, his usual cocky expression completely wiped away. The lawyers in the room, once scribbling notes and whispering, had stopped. They were all staring, trying to piece together the situation. The courtroom wasn't just tense, it was electric with anticipation. I could feel their eyes on me. Frank's, Gregory's, even the judge's. They were all waiting for the next move, and I was about to make it clear that I was in control here, not Frank. I stood tall, my heart racing, but my mind was clear. I wasn't going to let them think for even a second that I was scared. I'd been playing this game for years, and it was time for them to realize that I had been one step ahead all along. I slowly opened the folder, revealing what I had carefully prepared. The papers weren't just legal documents. They were the proof that would blow the entire case wide open. "What you're looking at," I said, my voice calm but strong, "is the document that proves I've been the sole beneficiary of the Langston Family Trust for over 25 years." I let the words hang in the air as I scanned the room. I could feel Frank's blood run cold. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. He wasn't expecting this, not in the slightest. He was about to learn the truth. the truth he thought he had buried under years of manipulation and deceit. The room erupted into murmurs. The judge stared at the papers, his fingers shaking as he scanned them. Frank's lawyer stood up, trying to assert some control, but it was too late. The evidence was irrefutable. I had never been just a helpless housewife. I wasn't just the quiet woman Frank thought he could dominate. I had been quietly gathering information, holding on to the trust documents, and planning this moment for years. Frank thought I didn't have the strength to fight back, but I'd been waiting for the right time, and today was it. As the judge motioned for the room to quiet down, I saw Frank's face twitch with panic. His lawyer tried to challenge the validity of the documents, but I had already anticipated that. I had prepared everything. The proof was ironclad, and there was no way around it. "Mr. Langston," the judge said, his voice firm now, "this trust was set up in your wife's name, and based on these documents, I'm afraid the claim you've been pursuing is not only baseless, but illegal." Frank's eyes widened. His mouth opened, but no words came out. It was like the floor had just been ripped from under him. He had nothing left to say. I could feel the weight of the moment, but I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. I leaned in slightly, feeling the full force of the room's attention. "There's just one more thing," I said, locking eyes with Frank. His face was drained of colour now. "You're going to want to hear this." The courtroom was still, all eyes glued to me as I watched Frank's face crumble. I hadn't just caught him by surprise. I'd caught him completely off guard. For years, he'd assumed he had control over me, control over the situation. But now, he was the one who had nothing left. The judge was still looking at the documents, his fingers tracing the lines, confirming everything I had already known. I'd kept my cards close to my chest, silently gathering evidence, keeping track of every tiny detail Frank had overlooked. Frank had thought his underhanded tactics would work. He'd tried to outsmart me, thinking I was just a quiet woman fading into the background. But today, in that courtroom, he realized that I had been playing a completely different game. And I had won. "Mr. Langston," the judge finally spoke, breaking the silence. "These papers confirm that the trust is legally yours, as well as the funds associated with it. The case you've been pursuing, against your wife, is not only invalid, but it's also fraudulent." Frank was frozen. His lawyer's face had turned an ashen shade, his confidence drained completely. I could see him searching for an escape, a way out of this mess, but there was none. The evidence was too clear. The game was over. In that moment, I felt a rush of emotion. Not anger, not bitterness, just relief. I had spent so many years being made to feel small, belittled, ignored. Frank had convinced me for so long that I wasn't capable of fighting back. But standing there, with all the power in the room, I could feel the weight lifting from my shoulders. I had done it. I had taken control of my life again, and no one could take that away from me. I looked at Frank, his face twisted in disbelief. His eyes darted between the documents, the judge, and then back to me. For the first time in years, I saw fear in his eyes. But it wasn't the kind of fear I'd seen before. This was the fear of losing control, the fear of finally being exposed. "You never thought I'd be the one to take you down, did you?" I said softly, my voice steady. It was a question I had asked myself over and over throughout the years. I wasn't angry with him anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was done with all of it. I had the last word. The judge ruled in my favour. Frank's claim was dismissed, and the trust remained securely in my name. The consequences for Frank were severe. Not only was his case thrown out, but his reputation too was on the line. The evidence I'd gathered over the years could lead to legal trouble for him, and I wasn't about to stop there. Frank's lawyer tried to argue, but it was clear this wasn't a fight he could win. My victory was complete. Frank's smugness was gone, replaced by a cold realisation. His attempts to control me, to steal everything I had backfired. Now I was free. As I walked out of the courtroom, the weight of the victory settled in. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was for sure. Frank wouldn't be able to hurt me anymore. I wasn't the same woman I used to be. I had stood up for myself, and now I could finally live the life I'd always wanted, one on my own terms. I stepped into the sunlight outside the courthouse, the weight of the years finally lifting. For the first time in what felt like forever, I took a deep breath and smiled. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and most importantly, my future. I wasn't the quiet, helpless woman anymore. I was Vera Langston, and I was finally free. The past no longer had a hold on me. As I walked away, I knew that I had come out stronger than ever before. Frank had underestimated me, and now I was the one who had the last laugh.